Hello, I'm Miriam Grace Go, Investigative Editor of Rappler. You are watching Newsbreak Chats. Newsbreak Chats is our monthly huddle with Rappler journalists where we share insights, analysis, and inside stories about the issues we've tackled in our in depth reports. In late March, the campaign period for local positions in the Philippines started, and Newsbreak also rolled out our series on political dynasties in select provinces. Joining me today are the editors and a multimedia reporter who are working with our journalists in the regions to come up with these in depth reports. Rappler's head of regions is Inday Espina Varona.
Hi,
Visayas Bureau
Gigi.
Hi. Visayas Bureau Coordinator Ryan Macasero, who is joining us from Bohol, where you might have guessed he's working on a story on the political families there. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Gigi.
And our Bureau Coordinator for Mindanao, Herbie Gomez. Hi, Herbie.
Hi, Gigi.
Thank you for joining me on Newsbreak Chats, even if I know that the three of you are also busy preparing for your upcoming show called Voices from the Regions. Ay, kwento niyo naman siguro kahit saglit yung Voices from the Regions, what our audience can expect from that. And when it's starting.
Well, it's already started, so we have it every week, usually on a Friday. And it's about hearing people directly, yung mga movers in the regions para makuha yung kanilang pananaw. Minsan dun sa mga national events, pero may twist siya na ito yung pananaw ng mga tao sa rehiyon sa mga nangyayari.
Okay. Abangan po natin sa channels and accounts ng Rappler. In your introduction to the Dynasty series, you said that if we will look at how the alliances are shaping up between presidential candidates and local political leaders, voters should have a reality check about inclusivity and participatory democracy. Why so?
Well, one, we all know that this election, a lot of people say it's existential. It's definitely very hotly contested. And the way the movements of national candidates are going, alam natin na kailangan ang mga boto ng mga tinatawag natin, mga bigwigs, mga regional bigwigs, mga provincial bigwigs. At ito lahat sila ay, with very, very few exception, ay mga political dynasties. And aside from that, there's something when we were checking the numbers and the different families, Gigi, who control the regions. Gigi, ang daming unopposed ngayon.
Yes.
At merong
Yes.
mga rival local political blocs who actually decided to coalesce para lang nga walang mga
Walang
opposition ang
posisyon.
magtatakbuhan. So dahil wala kang opposition, meron ka talagang freedom to choose. So it's actually um, a local buyer's market. Sa kanila manliligaw ang national politicians kasi unopposed yan, hindi masyadong kailangan ang national na kandidato.
Mhm. At saka pag unopposed kasi sila, no, parang wala, because they are not minding their own fights or battles. They can focus on campaigning for the national candidate that they choose to support, di ba?
That's true.
But did we expect any drastic changes in the configuration going into this particular election? Kasi alam
Um,
naman natin na, di ba, election after election, andyan yung dynasties.
Actually, padami. Rappler has been following up the dynasties, and every election, dumadagdag talaga ang number. Wala pang eleksyon na nabawasan ang number ng mga miyembro ng Congress, for example, or mga governors at mayors na galing sa political dynasties. Ang bago dito, ay usually kasi nag-uumpugan ng dynasties, no? Ang bago dito is marami ngayon ang medyo nag-a-alliance. We don't know exactly why. Probably they want to keep down the costs in terms of finances and also in terms of human resources. Pero kapag magkakaisa ang mga malalaking pamilya, mga higante, malamang yan after election, ang pasanin ng taong bayan mas palala.
Kasi nawalan sila ng options ang mga botante, ano.
Oo.
But given what's happening on the ground lately, did we think serious challenges could have been mounted against the ruling parties? Plus may pandemic ka pa na, 'di ba? Parang it discourages challengers or newcomers in politics.
Dito
Walang
sa
pa.
dito sa Mindanao may mga kasi it like for example in Misamis Oriental or even in Bukidnon, it started with the may godfather na dynasty, no? Ito yung main. And then itong main nag-branch out. Okay? Yung mga allies nila also formed smaller dynasties. Eventually, hindi rin nagkasundo kasi may kanya-kanyang ambitions, and now we're seeing in northern Mindanao, for example, we're seeing the smaller dynasties putting up a fight or challenging the bigger ones. In some areas nagsasucceed, pero most of the time, like in Bukidnon, it's still the Zubiri dynasty who's really in control of politics. Although we're seeing there was an attempt in the past from Neric Acosta to the Acosta family, another dynasty, to challenge the leadership of the Subiris. Pero hindi nag-succeed. Now, they have chosen to try to keep their district, yung congressional district na lang ang ano nila. Pero nag-form pa rin sila ng alliance with other groups, other smaller groups that are challenging the bigger dynasty. The same is happening in Misamis Oriental, where you can see Misamis Oriental is originally, no, it's since the mid 80s, it has been in the control of the Emano family. Lumaki yung mga anak, naging governor. The original Emano passed away, and the na-inherit nung anak, okay, and then the son is now fielding his sister, his brother-in-law, uh, for different positions, just to keep the dynasty intact. They're seeing opposition and from former allies who also built their own dynasties. So yun ang situation sa Mindanao right now. Or in
Parang ang
many.
nangyari, yung kinakwento ni Herbie, parang ito yung nangyari sa Evardones eh. Nung una,
Yes,
simula maliit
it's
sila
first
isa, tapos naging dalawa, no? Tapos tatlo na overturn nila yung isang dynasty, si Roland Evardone. Lumipat from Sulat to Arteche na overturn ang dynasty doon. So nagkaroon na sila ng dalawang baluarte. Tapos nagdami-dami. Pero ngayon, I counted, Diyos ko, Gigi, that was like 12. Tatlo sa province, dalawa sa Arteche, tatay at anak, ay may pangatlo, pinsan, re-electionist lahat, unopposed. Gana. Meron sa isa pang town, kasi nila, sa Sulat, ang dami nila doon, up and down the position. So makikita mo na ganoon naman talaga. Pag may from time to time nagkakaroon ng butas, makakapasok yung mas maliit na dynasty. And then the smaller dynasties, of course, they consolidate, especially if they're savvy, as will give the Everdones that, no, until they become the dominant dynasty in at saka yung mga lumang dynasty minsan humihina. Siguro medyo hindi na ganun kalakas yung mga second generation, not as hungry. So talaga may magbabago diyan.
Speaking of second generation, yung, yung iba kasi who are trying to defend the concept of having political dynasty, sabi nila daw, walang pinag-iba yun sa your parents are doctors, so most likely the children will become doctors. Your parents are lawyers, so the children will become lawyers. So parang family line of work ang politika. Do you agree? Kasi I think we should differentiate between iba yung political office, iba naman yung profession talaga.
Gigi, it should not be a birthright. It should
Hmm.
never be a birthright. It should be yung qualification ng tao talaga. Kasi kung if we bumalik tayo sa monarchy niyan, 'di ba? Parang monarchy na 'yon na birthright kasi anak siya ng congressman, anak siya ng governor, or anak siya ng mayor. Siya ang dapat heir, no? Mali 'yon, mali eh. Maling it shouldn't be a birthright. Yung sinasabi naman nila na may mga nagsasabi, let the people decide. Oh, tama. But I see that as exploitation of democracy, of a flaw of democracy. Yung bang you you control, you manipulate the majority,
To vote for you.
okay, which is happening in the national level now. You control their minds, manipulate them, and then keep the power to your family. Mali yun. I think that's may flaw.
We will have to point out, no, among the presidential and vice presidential candidates, at least four have their own political dynasties. So Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Sara Duterte, Manny Pacquiao, and Tito Soto. May nakalimutan ba tayo? But yeah, parang hanggang national talaga.
Ilan ba? Like si Manny, no? Si Manny, bago relatively sa politika. But we can see how fast, his dynasty expanded. Herbie, ilan na ba sila dyan sa Mindanao? Ang dami-dami
Ay,
na nila. Pati
may
sa
party
Rangani,
list
no?
eh. May party list eh. May governor, and then the sister-in-law is running for mayor in General Santos, 'di ba? Tapos may kapatid na former boxer din. Actually, ano siya, congressman, party list representative. Parang, if I'm not mistaken, yung grupo ata nila, dinilist ng COMELEC, nagtayo uli ng ibang party. Nominee siya uli doon. So, you know, ito yung mga flaws sa system na ini-exploit eh. Naghahanap ng butas, naghahanap ng gray areas itong mga ito para makalusot. Pero kung titingnan mo, dynasty ang ginagawa, which is really wrong, ano? Which is really wrong.
Oo nga, yan yung bagong phenomenon sa Philippines. Although for decades, every election may dynasties. Yung party list system, ginawang another avenue where you extend the dynasty.
Oo. Si Jerry Treñas, for example, no, the Iloilo City Mayor, so he's seeking re-election sa second term. Nag 3 terms na siya dati. Yung grandfather niya, senador, yung father niya, member of the CONCON, yung anak niya, tatakbo sa city council para ma-replace yung iniiwan na ng patapos ng pamangkin, no? At saka may isang anak pa siyang babae na second nominee ng Uswag Ilonggo Party List. Si Evardone rin dati, asawa niya, tumakbo rin sa Angwaray as second nominee. So, hindi pa kontento sa electoral gumawa pa talaga ng mga party list para madagdagan ng mga pwesto nila.
Sa Cavite din ganyan, no? The Revillas, one of the political dynasties. So Bong is senator, his wife is mayor of Bacoor, his brother is congressman of Bacoor. His son is running for congressman in another district. His older brother is with the Pacman party list, and his older son is in another party list, Agimat. Parang, so, inubos talaga kung saang avenues. But some people naman, our analysts are saying na the new generation of politicians kasi from the same family get elected because they've moved away from the traditional guns spoons and gold ng kanilang mga tatay at lolo. Parang sila naman ay naging professional na din, naghanda, nag-aral para dito sa position na yun. But does this excuse, the idea of having the same members of the same family occupying seats at the same time?
Kasi parang veneer of civility lang yan na parang, okay, parang may toga, pwede ka mag-posing dyan ng selfie na, meron kang diploma. But scratch a little bit, what have they learned from the parents? It's the same power worldviews na kami we will kami ang magdidikta sa mga taong bayan, no? Kayo ay may utang na loob sa amin. So ganoon pa rin. Kaya nakikita nyo yung pork, dapat patay na yung pork dahil sinabi na ng Supreme Court noon pa na unconstitutional. Pero every Congress nagkakaroon ng creative at mas creative ways na palaguin ang pork. And sila rin to, itong mga dynasties and many of those are younger, second or third generation ng mga politiko.
May nakakatawa pa rin eh. Especially in areas na maliliit like Camiguin Island province. Ang nag-aaway magkakapatid, mag-relative.
Totoo din yan. In some provinces, di ganyan na.
Wala nang room na natira. Sila mismo nag-aaway-away. Ang message kasi is kayo lang ang matalino, yung nasa pamilya niyo lang ang matalino. Yung ibang pamilya, wala nang karapatan. Kasi kayo hari diyan sa lugar na yan. Yun ang message. That's why it really leaves a bad taste in Davao. Ano ba naman yan? Mayor, ang tatay presidente, yung anak mayor,
yung vice mayor.
Vice mayor?
Vice mayor. Naglulukuhan, di ba? And don't give me the sasabihin mo sa akin na okay lang yan kasi pinili ng tao. Oo. Pero wag na
sa limited choices kasi sila ang napili ng mga tao.
We were not born yesterday. We know na nahanapan yun ng butas yung system. You exploited democracy, the weakness of democracy, to build your dynasty. But from whatever angle, that's a dynasty, and it leaves a very bad taste in my mouth.
Gigi,
Yes.
go on the next generation dynasties. I think in Cebu City, the interesting person in particular is that Bea Osmeña is the daughter-in-law of the Osmeña family, which is seen as one of the the most recognizable political dynasties in Cebu. But the stories that we're working on is actually the story of this dynasty dying out, along with the Rama dynasty, that hardly any of their children want to run for office. So Bea Osmeña is the wife of their only son Miguel, and it's her first time running for office. And I think it goes one of the frustrations of the Cebuano voters is that for the past decade, the fight in City Hall has always been between the Rama camp, and his party, which is Partido Barug, and the BOPK party or alliance of the Osmeña family. And that, I think that contrasts with what we see in a lot of other provinces, where a lot of the children are willing and are eager to get into office. But Bea herself is the first one. Her son has expressed no interest in running for office. And I think on Rama's side, none of his children want to run for office. So even if these two, the fighting of these two families dominate the headlines, it's these, I think, because of their children's agency, that these two dynasties are in danger of dying out. And Osmeña says, Tommy Osmeña, and Margot, when we talked to them recently, says it doesn't bother them. But some other of their critics would say that if they had their way, that they would work on beefing up their dynasty. So So I think in Cebu, it's a little bit different. And yeah.
Pero yung mga ganong opening, doon papasok yung mga bagong dynasty, di ba? Kapag gano'n na, parang nagkatamaran ba or hindi na interesado or naubos na yung long-running, long-staying dynasties, tas may bago ulit. In one of his analysis for Rappler, sinabi ni Professor July Tihanki, no, na palaisipan sa mga political scientists kung bakit yung mga countries, even if they go through democratic transition, parang nagba-backslide papunta sa pagpapalago pa rin ng mga dynasties. Bakit to nangyayari? I mean, we want to know, dun sa na-observe nyo sa ground, why is this happening?
Chichi, it's that confluence ng politics and economic power eh. Yun talaga ang nagsistrengthen ng dynasties at yun din talaga ang main factor ng bakit gusto nilang patuloy at kung pwede pa palaguin no ang kanilang dinastiya. Alam naman natin na hawak nila ang paghawak ang budget ng kaban ng bayan at lalo na kapag meron kang congressman na very instrumental na alam natin kung saan pupunta ang pera, ang national funds, no? Um, ano yan eh, meron silang malaking balon na pinagkukunan ng itong pinagmamayabang nila na ito ang gawa ko sa inyo. Pero actually, lahat yan na parang utang na loob ng mga tao sa kanila. Pero alam natin, pork yan. At lagi naman natin nire-reklamo yung mga stories about the abuses of pork, about things that should have really gone to agencies, but here, are being held by local executives or congressmen who then dangle it and say, come to papa o come to mama so that I will give you what you need, no? So patuloy yan eh. Kaya yan ang malaking cycle at wala pa tayong sagot kung paano ihan natin mabibreak. Kasi merong mga nag-a-attempt na tumakbo pero in the face of the money and the incumbency apparatus no ng mga dynasties, hirap na hirap talaga sila.
Actually,
Si-
yeah, Ryan.
Similarly in Cebu, we have actually two independent challengers in the mayoral race in Cebu City. Dave Tumulak is one of them, and he used to be allied with the Osmeñas and was a former city councilor, and Bimbo Fernandez, who was also allied with the Osmeñas. And I think the trouble for them is that the barangay captains and the even sitio leaders and youth leaders are all allied with one camp or the other. So when you're running as an independent, it's going to be very difficult to get the support of these barangays who are already allied with another camp and who both have far more resources than these independent candidates do, and they are running on that frustration of how long are we going to put up with the squabble of Osmeña and Rama? It's time for a new face, but where will they get the resources? How will they convince the barangays to support them? And one campaign staffer I talked to of one of the actually gubernatorial candidates says that the key to winning in Cebu and probably other provinces too is getting the support of down to the Purok and the sitio leaders. So I think that's the biggest challenge there for bringing new names into the local government.
May mga ganito ba na interesting challengers na nagmamount challenges against the incumbents in other provinces? Yung naglakas loob talaga. Wala akong partido, I just have volunteers.
Sa Davao, si Mags Maglana.
Yeah, si Mags.
Naging Pulong Duterte sa 1st District of Davao. Meron din. And then yung former congressman ng Davao, si Lopez.
Si Rui.
Lopez.
For mayor against Baste. A lot of people are saying suicide. Pero may naglalakas ng loob.
And
Ang
in that, you recently had a post also about, yung napag-isipan natin na given yung background ng ilang local allies, the trope na dumidikit ngayon kay Vice President Leni Robredo, parang this yung fear na yung wariness na baka mag-open to compromises. I was just asking, are we being hard on Leni Robredo, or bakit hindi ganun kataas ang standards natin for Bongbong Marcos or for Isko Moreno when they are establishing alliances with local leaders? Saan tayo lugar?
Okay, that's a good question. But ako ang pananaw ko is no-brainer question for me. Ang sabihin na mas mataas ba ang ano ba, will I weigh Lenny Robredo with a different scale, or will I expect higher standards of behavior from her than I will from Bongbong Marcos and Isko? Definitely yes,
Yes.
no? Because she has shown her mettle, and hindi lang mettle, but her entire promise and running, and the her impact on the people who actually look to her not as their savior but as somebody who they can actually work with, no, to change society. Mas mataas na standard, but I don't think it's Lenny per se, eh. Mas ano ako dun sa um, sino ang mga kandidato, lokal na mga kandidato, mga pamilya na dumidikit at nag-o-offer sa kanya na dito kung saan medyo mahina ka or kahit malakas ka noon, kailangan mo kami ngayon. Kasi ang context yan, matagal siyang mababa sa survey. So totoo, maiintindihan natin, kailangan ni Lenny itong mga pamilya na to. Wala namang question dyan. She cannot, push them away. But dapat lang din ang mga nasa tao, nasa botante, nasa supporters, titinang nila, bakit nakadikit ang mga to? They praise Lenny to high heavens. In the next breath, they praise Duterte, the father and the daughter, no? They praise Duterte saying na, because he says this, nagpaalam pa si Ben Bardone kay Duterte. What does that tell us? Ang laki kasi ng anong sisingilin pagkatapos.
True.
Um, yung paghabol ng accountability kay Duterte, kasi yun ang existential for the country to move on, eh. The same way as kailangan hindi mapasok uli ang isang Marcos sa Malacanang, which is also very important. Equally important is, do we again let another president get away with it, or do we finally, exact accountability? So kaya siya mainit na usapin dahil nakapasok yung issue na yan dyan.
Reminiscent to in noong 2001, no, when there was a movement to oust ERAP, and then, ang usap-usapan among organizers is, but do we want a President Gloria Arroyo? Tapos ang pragmatic nila noon, sasabihin nila, parang basta lang matanggal muna si ERAP and let's deal with GMA. And look what we dealt with nung siya na yung naging presidente, di ba?
9 years of GMA.
Oo. But itong um, volunteer-driven movement na nangangampanya para kay Lenny, may nakikita ba kayong potential for this to be sustained into a real people's movement even after the elections? Kasi wala tayong nakikita ngayon any mechanism or means para labanan yung mga dinastiya. Diba? Pero itong mga volunteers, we're thinking that they don't come from traditional political families. Sila yung pangtapat mo sa makinarya, but or exaggerated ba yung tingin natin sa nakakayang gawin ng volunteer movement? What do you think?
Hindi ako sigurado na malakas ang loob ng tao against political dynasty. I haven't seen it. There's a certain sector siguro na malakas na ang opposition sa political dynasty, pero I may be wrong, pero ang tingin ko mukhang kailangan pa ng 2 generations to let people let go of yung pananaw nila na okay lang yan, sila naman nasanayan na, ganun.
Herbie, you were saying something.
Oo, at saka ano yan parang nung 1986 din, it's part of the moment. Ang Filipino, magaling sa ganun Pag may cause, biglang, I
Fired
was in
up.
Butuan. Oo, I was in Butuan. I saw the rally of Lenny, and I felt the sincerity of those who attended the rally. Talagang you can feel their, hindi fake authentic yung,
May energy talaga.
authentic talaga. Pero yun nga, the same thing with EDSA. Magaling tayo sa umpisa Ang problema is what we do after na kamit natin yung objective. So, even if Lenny wins, ewan ko kung masusustain. It's possible that it can be sustained and it can grow. But experience tells us after that na makamit na, wala na. We're bad at ningas kogon.
And and we
Ah.
expect the elected leaders na, o sige, bahala na lang ulit kayong mag-fix everything, tas, magkita ulit tayo sa susunod na election.
Oo. And then, yun ang kinakatakot ko. Assuming, sa scenario na mananalo si Lenny, for example, mataas yung expectation sa kanya. Democratic leader to. People power. David and Goliath yung nangyari, and then she won. So we're expecting you to make drastic changes. Maganda. And if she fails, then people will madadala na.
Na pwedeng yun nangyari din kay Cory dati, di ba? Ang taas ng expectations.
Oo.
At, you cannot undo or correct what Marcos did in 20 years. So, paano yun?
Exactly, and that's why
kasalanan ng mga politicians din na nakasurround Yun din ang sila ang gumawa itong mga dynasty ngayon. Hindi ba produkto yan ng umusbong yan dahil sa EDSA? Karamihan
Yung mga dynasties Marcos time nakabalik, tapos yung mga bagong
nakabalik.
rise
Pero yung mga umusbong
dynasty.
like Misamis Oriental, the Imano, Dongkoy Imano, yung kingpin, was during the time of Marcos, hindi naman, he was just a town mayor. And then he became he was a member of the KBL. After EDSA, na-appoint siya as OIC governor. Doon nag-umpisa yung dynasty niya. So he started building. Okay. And then ngayon, nanganak yung dynasty niya, then you will see the dynasties of the Uy family, and then you have the Unabia family, and even the mayor of Cagayan de Oro traces his roots to the group of Dongkoy Emano. So,
that was the case with Jojo Binay in Makati. Naging OIC lang tuloy-tuloy hanggang ngayon, andito na, no? Ryan?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to jump in that I think definitely we've seen people's movements work. This volunteer-driven strategy work in the past with Duterte. So even when he campaigned in 2016, I see many similarities. I think it definitely is effective, but I think it's not top of mind right now to use it to battle or to combat dynasties. I think right now there's a willingness to collaborate with dynasties with the goal of getting Robredo into office and keeping Marcos out. So I think it has to be a conscious effort to of the leaders of the movement to keep it going and to think how if they will make it a priority after the election to use the people's movement to reduce dynasties in the country. I don't know if we're exactly there yet.
Gigi, siguro may nabanggit ka kanina at combined with what Shirley said, mas nakakatakot nga ngayon dahil una, ningas-kugon nga tayo, yung ating concept of accountability, panahon lang ng electoral season, no? Pagkatapos niyan, lahat, no, administration after administration, bumabalik tayo sa hindi mo pwedeng i-criticize ang aking manok na nanalo. and that's a very, very main cause ng ating cycles of problems tayo rin. Pero even worse is, masabi mo na ang taas ng expectations and then papabayaan lang natin. And remember, kaya nga ako mas lalong nababahala because all these families, these powers, ang tinutulak nila si Sara Duterte. So can you imagine, yan built-in ng mga weaknesses ng demokrasya natin. Tapos in the wings ay si Sara Duterte. Kahit sabihin pa ni Rufus Rodriguez, ni Joey Salceda na wala, hindi siya mag-aano, nandun yung threat talaga sa standing after if and when Lenny wins. Pero Gigi, mag-aano ako, ang hindi ko maintindihan nung binabasa ko yung mga political dynasties, yung mga tao nila, mga numbers nila, bakit ba mas mahirap ang lugar? Parang mas maraming pamilya na gusto forever sa politika. Doon sa Eastern Samar, grabe, yung pangalawang dominant na galing sa isa sa pinakamahirap nilang bayan. Ito si Nicart, ang Nicart family nila. Nanay, anak, yung dating governor, ito yung nagpapalitan rin. Matapos ang term, si nanay muna, pagbalik, pupunta si nanay sideways, so tatlo na nadadagdagan sila. Yung anak nila, ganun din, naging governor, tapos naging mayor, naging vice mayor, ang kapatid, ganun din. At ngayon ay meron pang, aside from them, may tatlo pang parehong ang apelyido. Ang isa ko nga nilagay is, in many of these poorest towns, ang dami ng multiple surnames appearing for multiple positions nila. 2, 3 sa bawat town, 4 sa isa, yung sa Maslog, mayor and vice mayor, magkapatid, unopposed pareho, and it goes on and on. Yung mayor ng Oras Town sa Eastern Samar, ang kanyang asawa, gusto magiging councilor na siya, tapos na ang asawa niyang dating mayor, babalik. Pag ganun-ganon, pag gumawa ka nga ng family tree, talagang you can see the,
Magsasanga-sanga.
oo, graphic talaga, as in, graphic ang example nila.
I'd hazard a guess, no, baka kasi the economics of running for public office. So kung very poor generally yung community, syempre iilan lang pamilya naman yung may perang itatapon or may access sa resources to aid their campaigns. But I don't know, Herbie and Ryan might have other explanations na bakit ganun. Sa mas mahirap na lugar, mas nagtathrive ang dynasties.
There's a small area, there's a small province in Mindanao, hindi ko na i-mention. Ang bilihan daw is 5,000 per voter during elections. Imagine that, 5,000 per. Kasi napakakonti nung iinan lang talaga yung botante. So kayang-kaya yung 5,000. And yung return nun sa dynasty, ano yun? May pork barrel, and then they control the capital. Ang dapat tinatanong dyan sa mga yan, magkano ba talaga ang kinikita ninyo at ayaw ninyong iwanan niyang lahat ng posisyon gusto ninyo. Kung pwede, pati posisyon sa Kapitolyo na janitor, kapamilya pa rin ninyo. Bakit ba? Ano ba talagang nandyan? At
Lalo
ayaw
na
ninyo,
ngayon, no? Yung sa 2022, siguro reminder sa mga botante natin, this is the first year that magte-take effect yung Mandanas ruling ng Supreme Court. Meaning, lumawak yung tax base na pagko-computan ng share ng local government sa ira ng national government. So, halos na triple yata yung budget ng mga local government units. So, isipin nyo how these politicians will be scrambling to get their hands on this huge amount of money. Ryan, you're saying something?
I think what we need to do is ang wala kasi law If you ask politicians, they will say a lot of them would say they're against the dynasty. Pero wala namang enabling law. What we need is a against dynasties.
But how can we have an enabling law when the political dynasties control
Ayun nga,
Congress? They've
yun
added
ang
more and
problema.
more numbers there.
And then, it's a vicious cycle, no? Ewan ko kung saan nag-uumpisa. It should start from the voters. Ang problema, itong voters ang boto sa kanila. So, saan
Gigi,
mag-uumpisa ito?
question ako kay Gigi. I don't know the answer here eh. Di ba minsan ang presidente gumagawa ng executive order pag di kaya pang pumasa ang batas? Kaya ba ng isang presidente gumawa ng executive order kahit man lang sa susunod na na walang tatakbo political dynasty? Kasi naman nasa constitution yung ban on political dynasty eh. So, tanong
Pero
kaya
yung
natin sa mga abogado.
kung ang provision nasa constitution laging ang sasabihin sa'yo ng tao, then it has to be an enabling law. Hindi pwedeng executive order ng presidente. Kung meron man, siguro pang tawid lang. Parang not related to politics, pero ginawa yan ni President Duterte before na yung hindi ma-enforce yung smoking ban na meron tayong batas na bawal ang smoking sa public places pero hindi na e-enforce. Nag-executive order yata siya na talagang may smoking ban sa public places across the country. But then babalik meron pa ding batas, parang dumiin lang yung presidente so that it's finally implemented. So itong dynasties, ganun din it cannot be implemented by a mere EO. Batas talaga siya. Si Attorney Marañon, the election lawyer who writes a column for Rappler, meron siyang sinulat years ago. He was pointing out that dun sa SK reform law that we have, there is a provision there, parang banning parang certain relatives up to a certain degree from running. Hindi dapat ka mag-anak ng SK or something. Sabi niya, pwede daw yun i-test na ang maging interpretation sa kanya is that's actually your enabling law para mawala maipagbawal ang mga dynasties. But yeah, it has to be tested definitely pag tinatry i-enforce ng COMELEC, i-question sa Supreme Court. But I think it's worth doing that, na i-question kasi baka pwede nga. Paano kung makalusot? Paano kung ito yung chance mo din talaga na to finally have a ban on dynasties. Yung sinasabi ni Herbie na paano yung botante naman, parang nagchi-chicken and egg thing tayo. So but it's been that way for decades. So I was wondering, Inday, bakit may hope ka na 2 generations pwedeng mabago? Actually, anong pwedeng gawin? No? If after the elections, kasi sabi natin binibitawan ng mga volunteers, if lang the volunteers will take their newfound role and influence seriously after the elections, what can they do para ito ay maging movement na in the next midterm elections, then we can mount challengers, we can support challengers. Kasi I'm sure there are a lot of good challengers, tapos sila tong mga nagiging independent, sila tong mga, nagfo-fall by the wayside kasi sa dami ng pera ng china-challenge. Where can people, voters, channel their support if they really want to end dynasties in their areas? Inday, you're muted.
I think the campaign for the volunteers for Vice President Robredo are showing the way, no? Kumukuha sila sa bulsa nila, mayaman at maliit, no? Alam mo sa ibang countries, mayroon silang mga pool where actually, di ba, nagkakaroon ng democratization of donors, no? Dito kasi sa atin, laging nakatingin sinong malaking isda ang para sa kanya. Right now, they're showing with Lenny Robredo, probably like they did with Barack, some time ago, kakayanin ng mga ordinary na tao na mag-push ng kampanya through their own funding, not entirely their own. But more than this, may pagbabago, may first time akong nakikita sa kampanya ni Lenny Hindi sila talagang independent ang mga volunteer organizations dito. As in, meron silang makinarya, like, sila yung may kakayanan sila mag-mount. Hindi lang sila volunteer na magdidikit, as in they actually have activities, they organize. And I think dito ako naggagaling para magsabing in 2 generations, baby. Kung
Mhm.
itutuloy nila dyan, win or lose yan, pwedeng, pwedeng mangyari yan. Because sila mismo, they will be educating themselves. And I think that will go a long, long way.
Oh,
Can
I
I
think,
just
sure, Ryan.
just add to that quickly? I think what would be useful from these groups is if they could, after the elections, once they're done with their accomplish their immediate target. Attorney Maranyon addressed, I think, this before in a previous column about the challenges of crowdsourcing funds for
Yes, yeah.
grassroots,
Mhm.
for independent candidates. I think that would be a great help, and I think you wrote previous stories on how much it costs to run for mayor. So I think that alone, the cost of running a campaign is enough to turn off someone who has great ideas, who has innovative ways they think they should be leading their localities. So what laws do we need to change in order to make it easier for people to make small donations without the hassle, for independent candidates they believe in? So yeah.
The hassle that Ryan is talking about, yung diniscuss ni Attorney Emil before, is if you will, kasi kahit gano'ng kaliit yung amount na dinonate mo, kailangan kang notaryo, parang fill up certain forms. So why would you bother, 'di ba? So sabi nga ni Emil, sana alisin 'yon. Kasi even you have GCash na, yung GCash na ginagamit ng ibang kandidato sa pag vote buying, gamitin nyo din naman sa pag-donate doon sa kandidato na gusto nyo, di ba? Pwede naman. So yun, whether or not Lenny will win dahil dito sa kanyang volunteer movement, I think dapat ang maisip din nila is in their own localities, nagkaroon sila ng degree of influence. Kasi nga, uunti-untiin natin, at least sa next local elections, meron na kayong epekto doon sa inyong community, di ba? Patas ng pataas.
Oo, kasi there's nothing more, mas nakakalungkot than to hear people moan na, ito siya, ganito siya, ito, ganito siya, tapos ang sagot ng tao, wala tayong mapipilian, ano?
Mm-hmm.
Baka dapat next time, dapat may mapipilian na tayo.
Oo. And actually, parang to be able to mount all these huge rallies, makapagbahay-bahay, ang ibig sabihin din, the people leading these volunteers, they are not political workers. They really are just professional, marunong magplano, mas efficient. Parang, don't you think these are alternative candidates to begin with kung meron kayong gantong leader sa volunteer movement ninyo, 'di ba? Sana yun yung wag nating bitawan, ano. So anyway, for our last question, since, well, we don't expect dynasties to be slayed or wiped out in a flash, tas ang tagal na rin na panahon, we haven't really dislodged so many of them. Ang tanong ko, based on what you've seen, not just in this election, but in past elections you've covered, how do public offices become available or accessible to more people outside of this exclusive circle of political families?
I think when leaders learn and I'm going to use the VP as example. When they've learned to channel not only aid, but also they've learned to bring in people into governance, sa tingin ko lalawak yan. Pero kasi pag tayo-tayo lang, and especially when people are very firm, they call it, meron silang hang up dun sa procedures that actually only serve those already in power, ay patuloy yung dynasty. But if there is a leader who breaks this open and then says that people in the communities, because we have existing structures that allow them to participate na, if there's a leader that ensures that these structures are used, then pwedeng makita ng tao na kakayanin pala natin, tayo na rin.
Isa-cite ko na rin na example yung in relation to what Inday said. Remember si Pinoy when during his inaugural, he spoke against the wangwang, against the use of the wang. And all of a sudden, walang wangwang sa gobyerno. LTO followed. The police followed. During the time of pag-assume ni President Duterte, may yung messages niya, yung mga kinagagalit niya, sumunod din yung mga nasa ibaba. So I think tama yun. Malaking influence ang leader of the country. Pero when people see their leader having a dynasty, of course, sa baba, you will see a lot of local dynasties in the provinces, in the cities. Kasi yung presidente mismo, is dynasty rin
He's
yung...
the head of a dynasty.
So, kailangan mag-lead by example. Malaking influence ang presidente sa legislation, especially.
For me, I think I've seen it, where I live in Cebu, a lot of youth engagement. There's a lot of energy poured into the campaign, not just for Robredo, but for the local candidates as well. There's a lot of brilliant, I think, ideas around. It's there. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think number one is if we're able to make it easier to fundraise from the community, to get smaller donations, and to be able to mount a viable challenge to these dynasties, and for people to realize that once that from their takeaway from this campaign should be that if we work hard at it, it's possible, and to not only focus on the national campaigns but also down to the barangays. I think a lot of the barangays themselves are their own little dynasties
Yes,
too.
exactly.
And to get new faces into the barangays, and as we said earlier, that having a good leadership in the barangays is also important in order for the city to progress. So I think it's there. Looking right in starting in your backyard, I think is very important, and hopefully that will have a ripple effect all the way to throughout the nation.
I like the word that you use, Ryan. You start in your own backyard. Kanina Inday was saying about there's a mechanism for people or sectors to be represented in governance. It's actually in the local government code, and coincidentally, it was during Mayor Jessie Robredo's time in Naga na na-exemplify talaga paano yan maximize. Of course, in some areas na merong dynasties din, parang iniikutan na rin ito ng mga political families. Biglang yung asawa ni mayor ay may NGO, tas siya yung sectoral representative sa council. But yun yan, katulad din ng party list na ginagamit sa pag-extend ng dynasties, pwedeng ma-abuse yun, yung people's representation in the council. So, bantayan natin, and I think we will be more effective sa pagbabantay if it's in our own locality. Kasi man-to-man talaga yung bantayan natin. So thank you, Inday, Ryan, and Herbie for helping us have a more realistic take on the political dynamics at the local level. We're reminding everyone that there are only 39 days to go before election day. Mangampanya ang kailangan mangampanya, mangumbisi ang kailangan mangumbisi, at sana matuto tayo dito sa people's movement na nakikita natin ngayon to sustain us to demand good governance after the elections. To those who are watching, for our coverage of the campaigns and elections, please visit rappler.com/section/nation/elections. And for our explainers, in-depth and investigative reports, podcasts, and video specials, please visit and bookmark our Newsbreak section at rappler.com/section/newsbreak. And if you want to be part of an exclusive group given access to exclusive content and events with Rappler journalists and experts, you may want to join Rappler Plus. You can check out how at rappler.com/section/plus membership program. And if you have leads for investigative stories, you can email us via feedback@rappler.com or slide us a message via Messenger on Newsbreak's Facebook account. I'm Miriam Grace Go. You've been watching Newsbreak Chats. See you again in April.